weeds, those pesky nemesis we have in between us and a beautiful lawn. Sometimes they have thorns, sometimes they're odoriferous, and sometimes they're just downright ugly. In this video, I'm going to give you just a handful of steps to get rid of weeds permanently. We'll go over what to do during each season of the year to ensure that you have a weed-free yard. Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. Let's get started. In order for us to understand how to have a weed-free yard, we need to have a basic understanding of what's causing our yard to be weed-free, and we use two different classes of chemicals. We use a chemical class that's called pre-emergence that prevents weeds from starting to germinate, and then we use a class of chemicals called post-emergent, and we use those when weeds have already germinated. The first chemicals that we need to talk about are the pre-emergents, and I want to start with pendimethalin. Pendimethalin can be bought in both granular and liquid forms. I prefer to use liquid forms because it's actually cheaper to put it down in a liquid form. And we're going to talk about cost of application later in the video, but right now I just want to talk about the different classes of the pre-emergent. So pendimethalin is a yellow liquid or a yellow granular. It's the cheapest form of pre-emergent that you can probably get, but also it's probably the least effective. It's a good pre-emergent, however, it doesn't last as long as some of the others. The second pre-emergent that I like to use is prodiamine. Prodiamine is a yellow product just like pendimethalin, comes in a liquid form and a granular form just like pendimethalin. It's going to be a little bit more expensive per application. However, the control you get from your weeds is also going to be a little bit greater, and also the duration at which it is active is going to be greater as well. So prodiamine is going to maybe last 2 or 3 weeks longer than pendimethalin would. Perhaps my favorite pre-emergent to use is also the most expensive, and that is going to be indaziflam. Indaziflam comes in a small bottle. It's only in liquid form, but we're only putting out like 0.1 ounces per thousand. But it's great in terms of weed control. You get months and months of control, where with prodiamine and pendimethalin, great pre-emergence, indaziflam is going to last a little bit longer for you. A different class of chemicals that I like to use for pre-emergence is simazine. Simazine comes in a white liquid, and it has a different mode of action than prodiamine and pendimethalin. And so sometimes what happens is we get what we call pre-emergent resistance. So if we're using the same class of pre-emergent year after year after year, if you're using prodiamine year after year, pendimethalin year after year, you may get some weeds that become resistant to it and will germinate regardless of the fact that you put it down. So with post-emergent herbicides, we can divide those up in terms of what they are trying to kill off. And so we can divide weeds up into two groups: broadleafs, which are dicot weeds, and then slenderleaf, which are monocot. And so dicot weeds, they have a branching vein habit, and then monocot weeds, they're going to have a parallel vein habit. So if you don't know if you're looking at a dicot or a monocot, look at the veins of the plant, and that'll give you some guidance in terms of what chemicals we need to use. So with dicot plants, we're looking for a chemical called 2,4-D, and 2,4-D is going to be in hundreds of products. You can find this on the shelf at Lowe's, Home Depot, your retail garden center. I'll leave a link for some down in the description below as well. But these are going to get rid of our broadleaf weeds. Things like clover and henbit. They'll actually get rid of onions as well. Just a good overall broad spectrum herbicide that's going to take care of all of those broadleaf weeds that pop up in our yard. The monocot weeds are a little more complicated. So there's a handful of chemicals that we have that we can use to control them. One of them is called Certainty. It has sulfur sulfuron in it, and that's really good at controlling things like poana grass. and you can get a little bit of control with crabgrass as well. But with crabgrass and with Johnson grass, so crabgrass is an annual that comes up in the middle of the summer, really hard to control. Johnson grass is a perennial grass, meaning that it comes back year after year from its root, also very difficult to control. You're looking for something that has the active ingredient quincurlac in it. Quincurlac is going to control your crabgrass and Johnson grass. You may need to do multiple applications to get rid of them because they're very tough weeds, but if you're persistent and get on like a 7 to 10 day spraying interval on those certain weeds, eventually you can get rid of them. Before putting out any chemicals on your yard, what I want you to do is read the label. The label is going to give you some very important information. One of those is for PPE, or personal protective equipment. Most of the time, it's just wearing some gloves. It's also going to tell you the rate at which you need to put out your chemicals. For example here, I have a bottle of 2,4-D, and if I read the label here, it tells me that I need to put this out at 1.1 ounces per 1,000. And all of these chemicals will have a label on them telling you the PPE as well as the rate at which you need to put them out. So when should we put out pre-emergence? I like to put it out 3 different times during the year. I'm going to do a first application in February. Now, if you're watching this later in the year, please don't click off the video here thinking you've missed your opportunity, because that's not the case. Hear me out here. Around February the 15th, hear from me in Zone 8A. Ideally, you want to do your first application as soil temperatures get around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And you may be asking yourself, Dr. Warren, how do you know when the temperature of your soil is 55 degrees? There's a couple of ways we can go about this. The USDA actually has a website that shows soil temperatures throughout the United States. You can use that, or you can do what I do. Go to the kitchen, grab the meat thermometer, and use it. It'll work. But a pro tip, don't tell your wife about it. Just wash it off with some soap and water, put it back in the drawer. It works. So the pre-emergent application for February, I'll also put in a little bit of 2,4-D in the tank as well. And the reason I do that is anything that could have been missed from a previous pre-emergent application that's trying to germinate and it's just really tiny, still below the dormant grass, you may or may not can even see it, it'll get those weeds as well. So I'll put in some 2,4-D with my pre-emergent. Most of the time in February, I'm putting out either prodiamine or pendimethalin. I'll do a second application of pre-emergent 6 to 8 weeks after that first February application, and it'll usually be the same pre-emergent that I put out before. So if I did pendimethalin on February the 15th, once we get to like April the 1st, somewhere in there, I'll do another application. Very important difference between my February application and my April application. I will not put any post-emergent chemical in my tank with my pre-emergent like we did with February. The reason being is this: most of the time when I put in a post-emergent with my pre-emergent, it's 2,4-D, and if you read the label on 2,4-D, you're not supposed to put it on newly germinated zoysia or Bermuda turf, and this is zoysia behind me. Next door over here is Bermuda, so you would not want to put that in. It's not going to kill your grass if you do it, but you are going to delay green up if you apply any post-emergent like 2,4-D during this time frame. The last application that I'll put down for the year is really the most important because it sets the stage for next spring. Your fall pre-emergent application, in my personal opinion, is the most important application that you can do. And this is where I swap up chemical classes on my pre-emergents. So if I'm doing pendimethalin or prodiamine in the spring, I'll swap it up and I'll do simazine or indaziflam in the fall. Our fall application of pre-emergence is really for poana grass, but if you're using something like indaziflam, it has a really long reactive period in the soil. It can keep our weeds down much longer than any of the other 3 chemicals we're talking about in this video. So I'm going to get some residual carryover for that pre-emergent going all the way into next spring. So now that we have talked about the types of pre-emergence, types of post-emergence, what time of year that I prefer to put those out. Let's talk about how we apply them to the ground. If you have a larger yard, say your yard's more than 10 or 15,000 square feet, my recommendation would be get a tank sprayer that you can pull behind a riding lawnmower. If you have a large lot, you're probably not push mowing that anyway. They make sprayers that you can pull behind your lawnmower. If you have a smaller yard, say you only have like 4,000 or 5,000 square feet of turf, you can easily do this with a backpack sprayer. So how do we mix our chemicals once we have selected our sprayer? The preferred method for mixing chemicals is to fill up your tank roughly halfway with water. So if you're putting out 10 gallons of product, fill it up with 5 gallons of water, add your chemical, and then add 5 more gallons of water, and that's going to stir those chemicals up into a homogeneous mixture. What you don't want to do is just dump your chemicals in, put the water in. It's not going to mix as readily. If you would go half water, add your chemicals, the second half of water, it's going to make a much better mixture. An important aspect of how we spray the chemicals on our yard is going to be really 2 things. You don't want to skip any areas. So what you're looking at here, last fall, I intentionally skipped an area for this section of B-roll. I wanted some poana to pop up. You can see on either side of this, there's no poana. So if you skip a spot, you're probably going to have some weeds come up. So make sure that when you're spraying your yard, you're doing it in straight lines, keeping a very close eye on where your spray is landing. And so when you turn, you want your spray to slightly overlap the lap you did previously. That way it ensures that you're not going to have any missed spots in your turf. How do you know you're putting out the right amount of chemical on your turf? Because we're mixing water, we're mixing chemicals, and you don't want to have not enough because you're not going to get the desired results. And if you put too much down, it could be detrimental to the turf as well. It's imperative that you calibrate your sprayer. An easy way to calibrate a sprayer is to measure out a known square footage. So for example, let's just say I was going to measure out 1,000 square feet in this backyard. I could do 10 feet by 100 feet, it gives me 1,000 square feet. I have a predetermined amount of gallons in the tank. We'll say I've got 3 gallons in the tank. I mark 3 gallons on a 5-gallon bucket, I put it in there, and I start to spray. I go over that 1,000 square feet, and then once I'm done, whatever's left in the tank, we can pour out, measure it. So if we started at 3 and I have 2 gallons in the tank, I know that I put 1 gallon of water out over that 1,000 square feet at the particular speed that I was moving at. So if you go slower, you're going to put down more than 1 gallon. If you move faster, you're going to put down less than 1 gallon. So the speed is really important when you calibrate, regardless if it's a backpack sprayer or a sprayer that you're pulling with your mower. You need to keep the speed constant. Once you're calibrated, I like to do 1 gallon per 1,000. It makes the math really easy on putting out our chemicals. For example, if we look at our 2,4-D bottle, it says to put down 1.1 ounces per 1,000. So I know that a certain speed on my mower that I'm pulling my tank with, it's going to put out 1 gallon of water per 1,000. All I have to do is put 1.1 ounces into my tank, and I know that I'm putting it out at the right rate. Pre-emergents are fantastic for keeping weeds from popping up to begin with, but you're not going to have 100% success. You'll get 99%, 98.5%, but inevitably there's going to be a few weeds that pop up here and there. And this is where it's important, where we talked about earlier with weed ID between a dicot and a monocot. So with dicot weeds, really easy. If you got 2,4-D on hand, you can spray it, and within 10 days, that weed's going to be gone. And this can be done with spot spraying with a backpack sprayer. So put 1 gallon of water in your backpack sprayer, put that 1.1 ounces in there, and just walk around the yard. And if you see a broadleaf pop up, hit it with the 2,4-D, and you won't have to worry about it 7 to 10 days from now. There's a handful of monocots that we see: Johnson grass, Dallas grass, crabgrass being the main 3. But regardless of which one it is, you need a product with quincurlac in it. And here again, mix your quincurlac according to the label. I believe what I have right now is like 2.5 ounces per gallon is the recommended rate. Walk around, spot spray those areas, and within 7 to 14 days, you're not going to have to worry about those weeds either. Really, just one time a year is all I need to do. So once I do my last spring application of pre-emergence around April the 1st or so, I may get a handful of weeds here or there that pop up. It's not a big deal. I take 15 minutes, I mix my chemical, I spot spray, and then for the rest of the summer, I don't have to worry about it. So how much does it cost to put out pre-emergence? And I'm going to give you the pricing based on the timing of this video. Of course, as the years go on, more than likely those prices will adjust with inflation. But for prodiamine right now, I just looked it up online, did the calculations. At the max rate, it's going to cost me 67 cents per 1,000 square feet for each application. Simazine falls in the same range with prodiamine and pendimethalin, right in between really. It came out to about 65 cents per 1,000 for each application. And the last chemical, imidazoflam, which is the active in spectacle flow, it was more than double the cost of that 60, 70, 75 cent range we were talking about earlier. It came out to like $1.90 per 1,000 for each application to put out. However, in my personal opinion, without a doubt, it is the best pre-emergent. You get the longest time duration in terms of control as well. So how I like to do things, like I mentioned earlier, we'll do the spectacle in the fall. It rolls us into spring. We get really good control early spring, and then we'll do our 2 other applications in February and April with prodiamine or pendimethalin, and that gets us weed-free yard all year round. I hope this video will help you in maintaining a weed-free yard throughout the season. If you have suggestions, tips, tricks, hacks that you do in your yard that we did not go over in this video, please leave them down in the comments below. We're a community of learners here, and I would love to learn something from you, the viewer. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor, and until next time, happy gardening.